So remember, we're finding the zeros, which means we want to replace y with 0. So this becomes x squared minus 5x minus 7 equals 0. And then just like when we factor, we want to identify our a, our b, and our c. A is 1, b is negative 5, and c is negative 7. So remember, our quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared plus negative 4 times a times c all over 2a. Again, you don't have to have it memorized, you just need to know how to use it. Remember, there's a negative in front of the b and another negative on the b. A negative and another negative make a positive 5. So that's plus or minus the square root. B squared, so I'm going to substitute in the negative 5 with the exponent there, plus negative 4, the negative 4 never changes, times a times c, all over 2 times a. Remember, I want you to simplify what's inside the radical first because that's our grouping symbol. So we have 5 plus or minus the square root. Negative 5 squared is not negative 25 because negative 5 times negative 5 is positive 25, plus negative 4 times 1 times negative 7 becomes positive 28. It's going to be really important for you to check these problems with your calculator because if you put negative 28 in there, you are not going to be able to finish solving this problem. 2 times 1 becomes 2. I'm now going to add the 25 and the 28 together. So I get my calculator out and have that ready to go. That becomes 25 plus 28, which is 53. Now, this is not something that I know how to graph. I don't know how to graph the square root of 53, so let me put that into my calculator, second square root of 53, and hit enter. I get 7.28, but if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, that becomes 7.3. I still don't know how to put this into a graph, so I want to now split this up into 2 based on that. That's telling me that I have both a plus problem and a minus problem to solve this. So we do 5 plus 7.3, hit enter and divide by 2, and we get 6.15, which rounds to 6.2. For this one, we have 5 minus 7.3, hit enter, and then divide by 2. We get negative 1.15, which rounds to negative 1.2. Go ahead and pause the video and see how far you can get on number 2 using number 1 as an example. Welcome back. You should have replaced y with 0 because we're finding the zeros of the quadratic equation. That means a is 1, and I'm going to make a mistake. See if you can think about what mistake I made. What I should have done is replace b with negative 4, not with 4, and c with negative 5, not with 5. I'm not going to rewrite my quadratic formula again. It's right here if you need to see it. Remember, a negative on the b and another negative on the 4 become a positive 4, plus or minus the square root. This is negative 4 squared plus negative 4 times a times c. That's all under the radical, all over 2 times a. This simplifies. Remember, negative 4 squared is not negative 16, it's positive 16. And then we bring down our plus, and then negative 4 times 1 times negative 5 is positive 20, all divided by 2. 4 plus or minus the square root of 36, all divided by 2. And then the square root of 36 we left out this time actually becomes 6, all divided by 2. Again, I can't graph something that looks like this. I need to split this up into 2 problems, 4 plus 6 divided by 2, and 4 minus 6 divided by 2. 4 plus 6 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. 4 minus 6 is negative 2, and negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So you have 2 zeros. So that graph crosses the x-axis at 5 and negative 1. For this one, we want to find the zeros. So again, we're replacing y with 0. A becomes 25, B becomes negative 10, and C becomes 1. If I want to use my quadratic formula to solve, then I'm substituting into negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared plus negative 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Remember, we've got a negative on the b and a negative on the b here. A negative times another negative becomes a positive, plus or minus the square root. And then we're going to start squaring this piece in our head. That'll save us a step every time. So b squared, b is -10. -10 times -10 becomes positive 100. You can use your calculator if you need help with that. Plus -4 times a times c. And all of that should be under the radical. All over 2 times a. Again, we're going to simplify what's inside the radical first. So this becomes 10 plus or minus the square root of 100. -4 times 25 times 1 is -100 all over 50. So now we have 10 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 50, which means 10 plus or minus 0 all over 50. Now, does adding or subtracting 0 change anything? It actually doesn't. 10 plus 0 divided by 50 is going to be the exact same answer as 10 minus 0 divided by 50. In each case, it becomes 10 divided by 50, which I can put into my calculator, and that becomes 0.2. Now, why do I only have one answer here? I only have one answer because what that means is my curve crosses my x-axis at one spot only, at the vertex. There is no other spot. There are not two spots where the curve crosses the x-axis. You pause the video and try this one on your own now. You should have replaced y with 0. You should have replaced a with 4, b with 12, and c with 9. This time there's no negative in front of our b, so the negative stays in the formula, and so it's -12 plus or minus the square root. All right, the first number here should be b squared. 12 times 12 is 144, plus -4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. This simplifies to be -12 plus or minus the square root of 144, and then watch your signs, there's a plus in the middle, but this is -4 times 4 times 9. I'm going to put that into my calculator, and I end up getting -144 all over 8. Well, I've got a positive 144 and a negative 144, so this becomes -12 plus or minus the square root of 0 all over 8. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0, and we learned last time that whether I add or subtract 0, it doesn't change anything. We only have one solution for that, -12 divided by 8, in which case that becomes -1.5. Good job. Now, this one is not in standard form. Remember, I need this to be equal to 0. So I'm going to start by adding, adding 1 to each side to make 0. That becomes 0 equals 2x squared minus 2x plus 1. That means a is 2, b is -2, and c is 1. So if I put this into the quadratic formula, remember it's -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, and I told you to rewrite your -4 as plus a -4. Remember, the negative and another negative become a positive, so that's +2 plus or minus the square root. B squared is 4 plus -4 times a times c all over 2a. This simplifies to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 4, and then -4 times 2 times 1 is -8, all over 2 times a, which is 2. I probably should have replaced a with 2 here. This becomes 2 plus or minus the square root of -4 all over 4. All right, I want you to get out your calculator, and I want you to find the square root of -4. My calculator says domain error. We cannot find the square root of a negative number. What that means is there is no solution. The curve does not touch the x-axis in any spots there. Why don't you pause the video and try example 6 on your own now. You should have started by adding 6 to each side to get this in standard form. So this becomes 3x squared minus 3x plus 6 is equal to 0. That means a is 3, b is -3, and c is 6. You can put this into your quadratic formula. That should have become 3 plus or minus the square root. B squared becomes positive 9 because negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, plus negative 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. We simplify what's inside the radical first, so that becomes 9 plus negative 4 times 3 is negative 12, negative 12 times 6 is negative 72, all over 6. So that becomes 3 plus or minus the square root, and then, sorry, I was messy on that. That says 9 plus negative 72. Put that into my calculator, and I get negative 63. Well, remember, we cannot find the square root of a negative number. There is nothing that multiplies by itself to give a negative. And so what that means is I am done, and I say no solution. All right, in your notes right now, I want you to write two things. I want you to write that the square root of a negative number is going to give you no solution. Make sure that you have that written down so that you're ready for your IP. The next thing I want you to write down is that your code word today is star. You guys are stars for getting this far, getting through this longer video than normal, and taking all of your notes. So your code word today is star. Make sure you write that down in your notes and be ready to put it on the IP. One last one. It's already in standard form, so A is 1, B is negative 4, C is negative 1. Our quadratic formula becomes positive 4 plus or minus the square root. B squared is negative 4 times negative 4, so that becomes positive 16, plus negative 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. This becomes 4 plus or minus the square root of 16. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 1 is positive 4, all over 2. And so this becomes 4 plus or minus the square root of 20, all divided by 2. And then this becomes the square root of 20, which is 4.5. And then 4 plus 4.5, and hit enter, and then divide by 2. That becomes 4.3. 4 minus 4.5 and divide by 2. That becomes negative 0.3. We're going to skip number 8 in the interest of time and go ahead so that we can get to our honors problem. If you are not in honors, you are done. If you are in honors, you're going to want to stick around for this one. We've got a formula here that's going to model the height of the ball. So we're going to do the height is equal to 3 plus 14t minus 5t squared. I don't have to do my own formula. They give this one to me. So it says, how long will it take for the ball to hit the ground? Anytime we're talking about something hitting the ground, what that's telling you is the height is 0. I also notice this is not in standard form, so let's switch these around. I'm going to put the negative 5t squared first, then the 14t, then the 3. I'm now going to use quadratic formula to solve, so that's going to become negative 14 plus or minus the square root of b squared. I don't know what 14 squared is in my head, so I'm going to put that into my calculator. That gives me 196 plus negative 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. Then we have negative 14 plus or minus the square root of 196. Negative 4 times negative 5 times 3 becomes positive 60, all over negative 10. That becomes negative 14 plus or minus the square root of 196 plus 60, which is 256, divided by negative 10. And then I'm going to use my calculator to find the square root of 256, which becomes 16, all over negative 10. I'm going to split this up into two problems, negative 14 plus 16 divided by negative 10. Negative 14 minus 16 divided by negative 10. This becomes 2 divided by negative 10. That's going to be a negative, and I can't have a negative answer for time, so I'm going to stop there. Negative 14 minus negative 16 is negative 30 divided by negative 10. That's positive 3, which is 3 seconds, and I'm done. Okay, nice job. Don't forget to go back to the haiku and find the link for the quadratic formula IP. Don't forget that you'll need to be logged into your school email to complete the IP. Stop by some office hours. This is probably the most difficult e-learning assignment we've done, so come on by and we'll work on it together.